Welcome to another session in the study of the book of Genesis. Found this to be very enjoyable to be able to come into your homes. Hopefully, you're getting some information that you didn't know before and give you an opportunity to study the Bible. That's our only purpose for this, is to give you that opportunity to get into the book a little deeper than what you may not have done before. We finished up last week toward the end of the book of Genesis chapter 24. And just a quick overview, if you remember, Abraham had sent his faithful servant out to find a wife for his son Isaac. And there were some parameters that he had set. Two of the main things that he told him is that he did not want him to leave his area. He wanted Isaac to stay at home, and he wanted for his servant to bring someone back to Isaac from where he came from, and also someone that would have been a relative of his. There was something that God did providentially to allow the servant to know which was the right woman to ask, and that came to fruition. We won't go back over all of that. But at the end of the day, here's where we are. We're back at this girl's home, and her brother seems to be in charge of the household. And at this time, we're going to find out if this young lady is going to be willing to go back and marry Isaac, of whom she does not know. We know that gifts have already been bestowed on her. Laban sees the riches that this man has and probably knows about Abraham. You would think because of his notoriety, he probably knows who he is. So let's pick up and begin with chapter 24, Genesis. We'll read verses 55 through 58. And her brother and her mother said, "Let the damsel abide with us a few days, at least 10, after which she shall go." And he said unto them, "Hinder me not, seeing the Lord hath prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master." And they said, "We will call the damsel and inquire at her mouth." And they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. Verse 58, I missed it. And they called Rebekah and said unto her, "Wilt thou go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." The hesitancy is really quite understandable when the family said, "We will ask her if she will go with you, but give us some time to think about this. Give us at least 10 days to make this decision." That certainly would not be considered a very long period of time, considering that they probably would not see this young lady again. But the servant was very insistent that they make the decision promptly. If it had been that long since they had seen Abraham, they knew that they may not see her again, and they just wanted to have some time with her, which is, again, very understandable. So the family called her, and her answer was very prompt, it appears. She said, and I quote, "I will go." Say a little bit about her sacrifice and decision that she made. First of all, she didn't plead for extra time to make that decision, which would be very understandable. Second of all, she said goodbye to the family with probably pretty near certainty that she would never ever see them again. She believed the messenger completely. Now, there was reasons probably why she did so. The riches probably didn't hurt anything. But she had faith that what was being told of her was what was best for her. And then she made the decision very quickly, and she made the comment, "I will go." She followed the messenger to then meet her husband. Let's read verses 59 through 61. And they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant, and his men. And they blessed Rebekah, and said unto her, "Thou art our sister, be thou the mother of thousands, of millions, 10,000s, and let thy seed possess the gate of those which hate them." And Rebekah arose, and damsels, and they rode upon the camels, and followed the man, and the servant took Rebekah, and went his way. She quickly said, "I will go." I can't imagine there not being some concern and some apprehension on her part. But she did go. And here we see we see a heartfelt goodbye from her family. It had to be a tough thing for them to do, to agree to let her go. Their blessing to her in verse 60 coincides exactly with what God's promise was, that through this lineage there would be a large number of people that would come from her womb and from her ancestors' womb. If it had been that long since they had seen Abraham again, they knew that they probably wouldn't see her again, and that would be sad in the situation. Another thing we notice here is that she had a nurse. By her having a nurse and also damsels is an indication that they had some affluence as well. We find out in chapter 35 the name of her nurse was Deborah. So now, as an overview, we now have the relief of the servant. We have the excitement of the servant, knowing that he has found for his master that lady that God would have that son Isaac marry. Let's read verses 62 and 63. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field at the eventide, and he lifted up his eyes, and he saw, and behold, the camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. And Isaac went out to meditate. Basically, just it appears to me means that he was going out in the field to check on what was going on with his herd. At this time, Isaac lived some distance south of where Abraham lived, Abraham, of course, lived in Hebron. We would assume that Isaac knew why the servant was gone, so maybe he was meditating and praying also for the success of what was going on his behalf. We don't know that for certain, but we have to assume that's the case. Verses 64 and 65. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. And she had said unto the servant, What man is this that walketh in the field to meet us? And the servant had said, It is my master. Therefore she took a veil and she covered herself. These verses almost seem to be reversed. In verse 65, she asked who the servant was that was walking in the field. Then she put her veil on and ran toward him. But when it says that she lighted off her camel, that's just an indication of her excitement to meet this man that she knew would be her future husband. Verse 66. And the servant told Isaac all things that he had done. I just wrote the word success. Again, can you imagine how excited he was to be now in front of his master, to tell him that he had achieved everything that his master had asked for him to do. And then verse 67, and Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. It appears that at this time Isaac had consummated the marriage in his deceased mother's tent. They appear to be very happy the way things worked out. And God's plan continues to move forward. We now change from Abraham to his chosen son Isaac, and soon to be Jacob in the following chapters. So we now have the son Isaac married to his wife Rebekah. So let's move on into chapter 25 of Genesis. I'm going to read verses 1 through 4. Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bare him Zimron, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shuah. And Jokshan begat Sheba, and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Asherim, and Letushim, and Luamim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Abadiah, and Edidah. All these were the children of Keturah. It's not known for sure if Keturah was married to Abraham before or after the death of Sarah, and nor does it matter. But just note that she is referred to also as a wife and also a concubine. It appears that the reason they are numbered here is to distinguish between their importance and the importance of his son Isaac, the son of Sarah. So even though we have a genealogy of Keturah, we know that there's a strong difference between those two bloodlines. Verses 5 and 6. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac, and to the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country. It's really easy to see the level of love and distinguish the level of love between Isaac and children of the concubines. It was important that he send his other children away so that in no way they would be considered on the same level as their son Isaac. Because Isaac knew that this man, he was going to be the chosen son. He knew that. It appears he did this while he was still alive, he being Abraham, so that it would be settled in their own land, in their own homes, and would help avoid any dispute over the land of promise. And it looks like they settled east of Canaan, somewhere in Arabia. And when it says that he gave all that he had to his son Isaac, really denotes, I think more than anything, that anything of importance, because obviously if he'd given everything that he had, there wouldn't be anything left for the concubines. So everything that was of importance, he would have given to his son. We also know that this is now the time for transition. We're going to be leaving Abraham, as I mentioned earlier. Abraham was considered the father of many nations, and his son Isaac was, of course, considered the child of promise. We also see in the Bible, in Genesis, that Abraham really had three classes of children. First of all, and primarily, of course, he had his chosen son Isaac, but he also had sons of secondary wives. He had Hagar, Keturah. We don't know of any other wives. Those are the only two that we know that are mentioned. But then he had children of his concubines, and they were unknown and they were unnamed. And those were taken care of as well. But he certainly had three different classes of children. Verses 7 and 8. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 180 years. Then Abraham gave up the ghost, and he died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. So we know that he died at 175 years old. Here's something I think that's interesting. Here's a note. He lived 35 years after the marriage of Isaac to Rebekah, but all that's recorded during this time is only in just a very few verses. Jacob and Esau, Abraham's grandsons, would have probably been about 15 years old at this time, so he would have seen those young men grow up. Of course, we know that pre-flood lifespan was much longer. We can talk about Noah that lived to 930, Methuselah lived to 969, etc. But at age 175, what's the description given about the number of years that he lived? It's described as a good old age. So we know at that time that would probably been considered to be an old man for sure. It says that he was gathered to his people. There are 6 people total that this is said about. Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, Aaron, and Moses. So here's just a basic overview of Abraham's life since we're moving on from him. Felt like it was essential to at least review a little bit. Genesis chapter 12, we have Abraham at age 75, and we see the first promises that God gives to him. Genesis chapter 16, at age 86, Ishmael was born from his maidservant Hagar, from Sarah's maidservant Hagar. In Genesis 21, at 100 years old, a full 25 years after the initial promise was made, his son Isaac was born to he and Sarah. In chapter 23, we know at 137 years old that Sarah died. And then in this chapter, of course, we know that at 175 years old that Abram now passes on. Verses 9 through 11. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre. The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well of Laban. What do you find comforting here? What I find comforting is in the fact that Isaac and Ishmael were reunited. There was animosity when he left. Again, we remember Ishmael to be probably 16 or 17 years old. We remember that Sarah complained because he was being hard and picking on his young brother, Isaac. So they didn't leave with a really good feeling one toward another, probably. But they were willing to cooperate in the burial of their father. Wouldn't it be interesting to hear that conversation? Did they reminisce about growing up? Did they talk about how great their father was and other things that they would have said? Note that he was buried by his beloved wife, Sarah, in the cave that he had bought several years ago. If you remember, he wanted to make sure that he had a piece of land that was purchased. He didn't want to borrow the land, or he did not want the land given to him. He wanted to purchase the land. Verses 12 through 16, we won't read these because it's a lot of names that are given. What I did want to say is this: what's the purpose for this genealogy to be listed? And it's to keep a promise. In Genesis chapter 17 and verse 20, he stated that Ishmael would become a great nation and that 12 princes would come from him. So Ishmael's genealogy is given, and guess how many princes are listed? Of course, the answer is 12. It was predicted that that would be the case. Verses 17 and 18. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years old, and he gave up the ghost, and he died, and was gathered into his people. And they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Assyria, and he died in the presence of all of his brethren. We simply now just have the recorded death of Ishmael, and not a lot more details that we can give about these verses. Verses 19 through 21. And these are the generations of Isaac, of Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian, Panabaran, the sister to Laban, the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. This is the 8th time so far we read in the Bible where it says, these are the generations. The inspired writers are doing all they can to enrich our faith in us by giving us the distinct and clear path all the way from these Old Testament characters to eventually the Son of God. It's important to note that Isaac and Rebekah have now been married for about 20 years. He no doubt might have been like his father, knowing that this promise was to be fulfilled through him. He may be growing a little impatient. Like his father, he would have to have patience in this regard. So what did Isaac do? He did the proper thing. He prayed that God would intervene. Verses 22 through 24. First of all, let's read verse 21 one more time. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. So we see that the intercession made by God on his behalf, on Isaac's behalf, came to fruition in this verse, where it says that the Lord entreated him. We know that that point that his wife Rebekah was going to have some children, was going to have a child. Verses 22 through 24. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. In verse 22, what is she saying when she says, if it is so, why am I thus? She's saying, God, on my behalf, Isaac asked that we have a child, and you've delivered that promise. But why is it that you're making it so hard on my body? It appeared at that point that she was struggling physically because of the pregnancy that she was having. She said, I'm not even sure if I want to live because this pregnancy is so difficult and it's painful. Why is it to be this way? It's clear that she had received her answer in spoken form, because here's what the Lord said. Look how clear it is, because it says, the Lord said. It's clear what his answer was. Not only is an answer for her concerns, but it's actually a prophecy as well. What is the prophecy? Well, she's going to have two children to be born. One would be strong and one would be weaker than the other. And we see that, of course, come to being. The predictions of two nations were not fulfilled during Jacob and Esau's lives, of course. Esau was to become the nation of Edom, and Jacob would become the nation of Israel. But here's what was said by the Lord. The Lord said unto her, Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And that was unheard of at that time. That last expression, the elder shall serve the younger, that was just unheard of at times. Here's what the angel told Rebekah. There will be twins in your womb. They would both be males. Each son would produce a nation. The younger son's nation would be the most powerful. The older son's nation would be in subjection to the younger son's nation. This was before modern technology. There was no way for this lady to know that she had more than one child in her womb. But the angel Jehovah surely said that she did and knew that was the case. Verses 25 and 26. And the first came out red all over, like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. The last thing I put up here I thought was interesting. Wonder if she told her husband about this prophecy. The prophecy said that the younger would be stronger than the older, which was very much against, of course, tradition. We don't know the answer to that. We have to assume that probably she would have told her husband Isaac that was the case. I found this to be humorous, but I also found it to be easy to remember. Esau was described as being red all over because of the amount of hair that he had that was red. I'm not certain how pretty that baby would have been. We as grandparents don't ever see children that we don't think, especially if they're ours, that are not beautiful. But the description that's given of Esau doesn't, in most of our minds, categorize a beautiful baby if that baby had that much hair. So let's go ahead now and read verses 27 and 28. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Let's compare Esau and Jacob. Most of the time you always read Jacob and Esau, but Esau was the oldest, and that's why it's written here as Esau and Jacob. First of all, he was the first to be born. Thus, he should rightly so receive the birthright from his father. He was red and hairy at birth. He was a hunter. He was a man's man. He was the man of the field. He was loved most by his father. And then we have Jacob. He was the younger son. His name means supplanter, heel catcher, because he literally pulled the heel of his brother as he was exiting the womb. And he was in the business of breeding and tending after cattle, and that was considered to be a much better vocation. And he was loved most by his mother. We're out of time today. We went through this kind of quickly. Felt like a lot of this material most of you people are already aware of that are listening to this. We'll move on further and talk a little bit more about Esau and Jacob and more about what happened to the birthright. Thank you for your attention. God bless you, and I hope you look forward to our devotion done by Josh Pierce here in just a little while. Thanks for listening.